The Liberal Vannin party held its AGM a few weeks ago and agreed that government should be more transparent on procurement. They also asked for the proposed new government levy to be progressive and include a tax on capital or wealth. We'll hear from the party chair, Paul Wetherill, in the second part of the programme, but first, Liberal Vannin founder and long-standing former MHK Peter Karran has renewed his call for new measures to alleviate the housing crisis.
Well, I did a paper some time ago about how to deal with a number of the issues. This is the biggest social cancer we've got. We go back 60 years to when Ed Collister was bringing about ideas of bringing in income for government. We've got to try and get the government out of bed with the vested interest in the developers. There are simple solutions to many of these problems if the political will was there for them to start representing the interests of the common people in the Isle of Man.
I mean, there was a report went to Tynwald in July about a development levy, for example, and basically government had done some work. They'd had consultants in to look at it for them, and basically it was deemed not to be the appropriate time because the development market was quite weak at the moment, and they decided not to introduce that levy effectively on housing.
If you go back to the House of Keys Hansard, you more likely find the same was argued by the farmers who had the land to sell in the first place. When Ed Collister was MHK for North Douglas, the reality is there are solutions. There've been solutions, but the problem you've got is you've got to get people in Tynwald to actually address it. I mean, I thought it was an absurdity of the previous Chief Minister, a landlord, talking about how the numbers have dropped for local authority houses and for first-time buyers when they've artificially reduced the levels for income to an absurd level, which is unrealistic, especially if you're 40 or 50 years of age. That's why we need a proper part equity mortgage scheme where we don't create more inflation into the capital basis of the property market as it is now, as it's actually counterproductive and it's creating a social cancer. When I think of when we went in there, one of the first things that we tried to do was to get employment laws. We got 6 weeks maternity leave for women and crowed about it. So they give 12 weeks to horses in riding establishments. We had 45% the average wage of what the Manx worker was on to the UK. We've changed that, but all that plus and positivity has been lost simply because of the drip feeding of the market and the issue that they won't address what needs to happen. We need to be following similar ideas to the Channel Islands. 30 odd years ago I first raised this, and again the lobbyists who have the strings of too many members of Tynwald then and now it appears to many at the present time are getting away with not addressing it. We see in Britain now, in Lake District, you see in Cornwall, they're doing initiatives in order to protect the locals and stop the artificial inflation as far as the market's concerned for many of these houses.
Do you think that members of the House of Keys are serious, I suppose, might be the question. I mean, 3 years ago we had an election. Everyone was talking about a housing crisis. Everyone was who was putting their names forward were talking about solutions that needed to be found, and there was nothing that wasn't going to be done to try and sort this problem out.
There's no opposition, is there? There's no opposition. That's the problem we've got. We've basically got a one-party state by patronage, even worse than it was when we were there.
Well, I suppose it's not by patronage so much now, is it? Because members get paid whether they're on government departments or not.
Yeah, that's a very good point. But the threshold, as far as the commitment, I think, has changed an awful lot. I mean, I couldn't dream of getting away with what some of them get away, turning their constituents away. And instead of addressing the issues that they want, I mean, you just wouldn't get re-elected. Admittedly, I was always in the vanguard of what wasn't very popular. even though they try to make out, I mean, like anti-Birch and anti-Hanging, pro-European Court of Human Rights, and many other things, rehabilitation of offenders, lots of very unpopular positions. And I always thought my constituency work helped me a lot on that basis, because they would forgive me for the fact that I wouldn't go along with prejudice and rhetoric as far as that's concerned.
I don't know how many houses of keys you sat in. Would it be 5 or 6?
7, I think, because of course I was 31 and a half years there. But the fact is that what we need to address, we need to be bringing into the planning process use and ownership. No one would object to people building houses in the countryside if we knew they were actually going for nests and not nest eggs. And what we need to do is, in use and ownership, we need to develop the strategy of where we have certain houses that are soiled as far as their commercial ability, but not the quality. I mean, we look at these first-time buyers' houses, all right, for people like me, sad old bachelors. But if you've got a wife and kids, and you've got your kitchen in your living room, and you're living on cheek by jowl with hardly any back garden, this is not how we should be looking after that generation. They're the generation we need to be investing in. No wonder we're having the social problems we've got. And the answer has to be, in planning, 20% of all new applications should be with restrictions on. They've got to have Isle of Man worker status. They can't own it if they own a second residential property, and they can't rent it out. And I think there should be a load of more land released if it's on that basis, in order to bring the market to a reasonable conclusion than it is at the moment. Because the danger will be the economy's going to collapse, because there's no fiscal control over this lot as far as deficit spending. And what we're going to end up is a repeat of what we saw in the 70s, where a few rich pickings were given by the rich, and the poor got just left with lots long-term debt and liability.
So, I mean, you've mentioned the Channel Islands and Cornwall, and also the Lake District. How exactly does it work then? Because many people listening to this won't be housing experts, won't know all the buzzwords and all the terminology. Effectively, what are the restrictions that are placed?
You know how it works. The farm workers' cottages had to be for farm workers, and they had to go for planning to change of use. What we would do is we would create houses that would not just be size, location and design, but also use and ownership. So them houses would be permanently houses that had restrictions on for any Isle of Man worker, so long as he didn't own a second residential property on the island, to purchase. No hedge funds, no aggressive landlord purchasing policy. What we have at the moment is we have a situation where the first-time buyer is having to compete with somebody who can come up with the cash. Now, we need also to bring about is a part equity mortgage scheme. I am sick to death of the way they attack people in council houses all the time. Yes, there are rich people, and in the past, some of us have tried to get them outed from the council house where they own property. But they are rarity as far as that's concerned. The real problem with the council houses is that we need to bring about rungs in the ladder of a property owning democracy. As I explained in the paper I did on my parents' case, where they looked at a house that was 12,500, could just about afford that.
And this was when?
In the 70s. But the house went up by $3,000. Because of that $3,000, they never moved out of their council house. So the situation is that council house was sterilised until my mother went into the nursing home, and then the state had to pay for her costs. Now, if there would have been a £3,000 equity charge on the property, when it was sold, 80,000 would have gone back to the taxpayer. my mother would have paid for her own nursing home costs at £1,250 a week, and also the house in Springy, Porose, would have been used for other people who needed a council house, social housing. And that's the tragedy is that when you know how it works in there, and I used to have people saying, ministers with no integrity, no credibility really, saying, we just vote against you because it's you. And simply because, as you know quite well, if I was to double their wages and give them an extra 10 years of life, there was at least 10 of them that would vote against it on the principle it came from me, because it's a playground. We need a national government. We have big priorities with the predators of the UK government. Now, the Labour Party in the UK will be good for the Isle of Man, but if the fact of the matter is we have not diversified the economy. The biggest Lancashire enterprise and business on this island is government.
The government, I'm sure, if they are listening to this, will say, well, no, we've got all these plans, we've got new strategies, we've got, there's strategies coming out of their ears, there's that many strategies. Do you have no confidence at all in government? Do you believe that government is on the right track?
Well, as you know, as Manx, yam yat. The strategies say one thing and they do another, as I say, and that was always the problem with the independents, was the fact, yam yat, Tory to you, Liberal to me, Labour to the dog, and nothing to anybody but their career. We need to be starting to see a focus on how we're going to develop what we're going to do with the government of the Isle of Man. This government has done nothing, but things have gone backwards, and that's a shame. And the problem is, it's easy to fall in a hole, but it's harder to get out of it. And this is what worries me. And the housing crisis is a major economic factor of why we're losing so many young people off this island. And these are two simple solutions that could help revolutionise property ownership on the island, just like Cecil McPhee did with the issue of bringing in the government mortgage scheme to counteract the Usury Act that we finally got rid of in, I think, 1985-86. So it's about legislating, it's about environment. And what all the members of the House of Keys as parliamentarians should be doing is making the environment for things to happen, for the freedom to flourish, not for the freedom to flourish as it was when I was in there, where it was for the few to fleece the rest of us with crony capitalism, postcode justice. Now, I hope that what we will see is we will see somebody take up my proposals as far as the restricted hold planning. I'd like to see someone take up my proposals about the part equity mortgage scheme that doesn't create more debt and liability, but actually starts putting some serious runs into the ladder, not just for the social welfare of the nation, but also for the economic welfare of the nation. Because what we've seen is we've got away from scab wages, scab employment conditions. That's what the island was promoted when I entered politics. Now we've changed that, but that's been gobbled up, the economic advantages, by the fact that we've allowed a cartel to drip feed the market. We hear the nonsense about all this sown land, when a friend of mine in my constituency has only recently died, and so long as she was alive, there was no chance of that land ever being developed, and yet it was zoned for the last 40 years for development.
Do you think, because obviously at the moment we have a relatively inexperienced House of Keys and even, similarly inexperienced Legislative Council, you've fought 7 elections. Do you think members are perhaps as up to speed as they need to be about the reception that they may well get if they haven't addressed things like the state of the economy, the state of government finances, and indeed the housing crisis?
I think the problem we've got over here is we're too servile. The problem we've also got over here is we need some conviction politicians in the House of Keys that are going to actually fight the corner of what they're there for. They're there to serve, not be served. The problem you've got is we've created a great public service, and some of them are really good public servants and work very hard for us. But a lot of them have the attitude, as particularly further the higher they go up, because of the lack of any political interference or intervention, I should say. They run the strategic policy of the Isle of Man government, not the politicians.
In terms then of your specific housing policies, they're not hard to introduce, you wouldn't have thought. I mean, the part equity scheme, presumably government would have to find some funds to put into a part equity scheme. But the planning restriction on a proportion of homes for the uses you mention, that wouldn't be too difficult to introduce.
Of course it wouldn't. And of course, the problem that always disgusted me when I was in there, if it was social welfare, we had to go through all the parliamentary procedures. If it was some bank wanting to reformulate, we could put 3 readings through in the lower house in the morning and 3 readings in the upper house in the afternoon. It always wondered whether there was an opportunity for someone to do well out of that opportunity. But no one was ever proved as far as that's concerned. But the reality has to be is we have to address this housing. This housing can easily be done, like you say, primary legislation, secondary legislation for a part equity mortgage scheme. I'm disappointed that the government in the Isle of Man are not taking it on board. I've circulated it before. I even offered and would hand me pension back when we had the situation over the Legislative Council to become a member of the MLC, which was against the grain in many ways, as I give them that much stick. But the lack of experience would be an opportunity for them. But the reality is, they were more horrified that I was prepared to say that you can't expect to get your wages and get a pension as well. We need to start showing by example, and there isn't much shown by example in the House of Keys at the present time.
I mean, that lack of experience, I mean, it's certainly something that I frequently mention. How does that impact, do you think, on the way in which politicians go about their approach to trying to address these problems?
I think you're giving them the dumb blonde routine. The reality is, if somebody who can leave school at 15 with a dolphin certificate for swimming can highlight more than 90% of all the dodge, diddles and fiddles in Tynwald when he was there, then I'm sure many more could do it. The fact of the matter is one lost 18 years' worth of ministerial pay and perks. And when you think of the way the opportunities of some members, that they almost got as many air miles as an astronaut, and I wouldn't send them to a corner shop to get me a pint of milk. There's too many perks. Admittedly, they've addressed one of the issues that I was on about for years. But what shocked me is the fact that I could only get 3 people to sign my nomination paper, which I took as a bit of a thing, a compliment in some ways. But I mean, the fact that they didn't want somebody, on that basis. But I hope and pray that somebody in the House of Keys will get in touch and will do it. I've talked to a number of politicians, but I'm afraid what it is, whether they just want to not fall out of the social club at the House of Keys, but this is something that needs to happen now, not just for the social cancer it's causing in our society, but also the fact it is economically helping to destroy the economic base of this economy, which we have made such progress on over the last 40 years, from the poverty-stricken, corrupt little hole it was when I was a child, growing up in this island.
Last time we spoke, we were talking about the late Eddie Lowy, and certainly when I was first elected, Eddie was a tremendous person to go to, someone with loads and loads of experience, and the sorts of things that Eddie would tell me were actually, if you want to sort this problem out, you get on and you sort the problem out. You don't spend time, you spend some time investigating and researching, but don't just sit back and assume that the civil servants and the advisors are there to solve the problem. That's actually your job, and if you as an MHK don't actually pull your finger out and sort something, then someone else will be sitting in your seat in 5 years' time.
The reality is, it's hard won what we've had. The improvements we got. People have no idea how we've improved. We only released the unmarried mothers in '87 from Ballamona, the lunatic asylum. We had, there were so many things that have improved, but it's based on a good economic basis of the economy of the Isle of Man. We can only spend what we can earn. And Eddie Lowy is, as far as the working man's concerned, is more than likely the most significant contributor to the welfare of the island over the last 40 years. Eddie Lowy was dealing with things in his day before I was there. In fact, you talk about little words of advice. Eddie used to say to me, Peter, when will you learn? You kick them, they'll kick you. I said, at least I can kick them for the full trammock. They can't get anywhere near their full trammock.
Well, Peter Karran, hopefully someone is listening to this and will take up your ideas and perhaps do a little bit of research of their own into them and maybe bring them forward in some form in the not too distant future.
Well, that would be good, because if we don't address the housing crisis properly, then what we're going to end up with is a situation where everything that has improved in the right direction is going to die on the vine. I hope that this lot will turn around and start with primary legislation as far as the restricted hold planning, and also with the part equity mortgage scheme, where we can make it affordable. There's so many people who get divorced later on in life. They've got a chunk of money, but they're then forced to give it to private landlords. When if we had a part equity mortgage scheme, we can get them back on the property ladder. It's a win-win situation, just like it would have been if my parents in 1975 would have had that opportunity, but if the government was about with a part equity mortgage scheme.
That was Peter Karran. More after the break. You're listening to Perspective. I'm joined now by Paul Wetherill from Liberal Vannin. You are the chairman and the secretary of the Liberal Vannin Party. Is that because you're a willing horse, or is it because there's a lack of volunteers?
A bit of each, in that, I'm very happy to take on both jobs and have been for the last 2 years, trying to persuade people to be more active. We've got quite a lot of members in Liberal Vannin Party, but it's difficult sometimes to persuade people to step up to the plate and take on some responsibilities. So during the course of the year, I'm hoping someone will take over at least as secretary, and I'm willing to pass the baton on as chair as well. But at the moment, I'm enjoying doing it, so we'll see what happens over the next 12 months. Party
politics occasionally is discussed on these programmes. Mm-hmm. It's never really caught on in the island, has it? You have had a Labour Party which had a massive influence at one point on Manx politics. Mm-hmm. That's kind of, it's still there, but it's not really gone from strength to strength. It went from strength to a relatively small number now of MHKs. Mm-hmm. You have the Liberal Vannin Party, which started off with great promise. I think were the 3 Lib Van members
We've had
elected?
3 Liberal Vannin MHKs at the same time in the past, yes.
Now down to 1. Mm-hmm. Is there a future for party politics, and particularly the Liberal Vannin Party?
I'm sure there is, and I take issue with Chris Robertshaw on a recent Perspective. You interviewed him, and he said party politics is dead on the island, and I'm sure that isn't the case. It's not even moribund. It's ticking along, and yes, there are three parties at the moment actively standing in elections. There's the Isle of Man Green Party, Manx Labour, as you said, and Liberal Vannin. We're competing to some extent for the same support, but we do have distinct policies that differentiate the three political parties. I think the idea of independence has a lot of persuasion for people. The idea of being independent is something that a lot of people think, that's great. I'm independent of everybody else. But in reality, none of us are independent, and we all have to make compromises in order to achieve objectives. But persuading Manx voters and people to actually join political parties and stand for election is quite difficult. When I first started out in politics back in the UK, I was in North Yorkshire, Sunak's area, an erstwhile Prime Minister of the UK. And at the time, this was back in the 1970s, most people stood for election at that point in rural areas like North Yorkshire as independents. They were actually Conservatives, members of the Conservative Party, most of them, but they thought it was they get more support and they get more influence by being seen to be independent. All that has changed, and hardly anyone stands as an independent there any longer. The Isle of Man, I think, is still working out why they should have political parties rather than independents. But, it's my job as chair of Liberal Vannin to persuade people to support the party and to get actively involved and stand for election.
You did raise an interesting, lots of interesting points there, one of which was that the Isle of Man Green Party, the Manx Labour Party and Liberal Vannin actually have a lot in common. Has there ever been any thought of actually trying to work collaboratively either with electoral pacts, or perhaps even actually say we're so similar that maybe we should merge?
There's been no... there's probably been thought about it, but there's been no express desire to do that from any of the political parties. The situation in Jersey is an interesting position with Reform Jersey, which is a fairly left-of-centre party, and they have succeeded in...
Not like Reform UK, then?
No, nothing like Reform UK. And, they've had some success recently, and they're part of government with, I think, 7 or 8 representatives in the states of Jersey. So whether there's any merit in having something similar on the island, I don't know. But the history on the island is that the political parties have tended to mirror the UK political parties. Liberal Vannin isn't part of the Liberal Democrats in the UK, but we have affiliations with them and with the Alliance Party in Northern Ireland. So, we follow their policy direction to some extent and have a lot of sympathy with it. And I'm sure, Manx Labour Party would probably be seen as to the left of the current Labour Party in the UK. And the Isle of Man Green Party probably similar to the Green parties in the UK. So we're offering a choice to the electorate, but at the moment we're all struggling to find enough people to stand to actually say, if you elect us, we can form a government. So that's the difficulty. Until you get success, then it's difficult to persuade people to support you.
And I'm guessing that you might have heard my promo, because one of the things that I ponder, which I often do in my promos in a slightly cheeky sort of way, but I say here some politically bold suggestions from the Liberal Vannin Party which could cause a ripple of anxiety among the island's wealthiest residents. But is it just talk, or will the party deliver some meaningful change? And of course, that's the kind of the proof of the pudding, isn't it, for the electorate? What actual meaningful change will you deliver as a political party? And when you've only got one member, that's quite hard to deliver, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And we have one member in government at the moment on the Council of Ministers, Laurie Hooper, who's, I think, doing a good job at helping to change direction in terms of health and social care and achieving some additional funding for it. But, his responsibility for health and social care, and we have very little influence on other aspects of how CoMin operates and policy direction in terms of infrastructure, education, treasury, etc. Yeah. The only way of achieving better is to be able to field a broader slate of candidates at the next general election. And at the moment, what we're doing following our AGM last month is trying to develop a series of policies that will form a core of our manifesto in 2026 and try and attract more people to put themselves forward as Liberal Vannin candidates then.
You had your AGM in August. I mean, that maybe is another possible reason why you didn't have so many. You have fewer people coming forward because a lot of people go on holiday in August, don't they? But that aside, some of the things that you've suggested from that party AGM, the government procurement, you're keen to see that there should be disclosure of any contracts valued at more than £100,000, and this should there should be a very clear and transparent process on the part of government departments. Mm-hmm. What's the thinking behind that?
Well, part of what Liberal Vannin stands for is more openness and transparency in the way government operates generally, and there's often criticism of the way government handles contracts. Especially on the larger contracts such as the prom and the ferry terminal in Liverpool, etc. And I think it would benefit government if they were able to be more open and transparent about the contracts that they enter into. They often, when people are asking, why has this happened, say on the prom, why is the overspend and why hasn't this development of the prom happened in the way it was supposed to, and government gives some information, but then they say we can't give any more details about the contract because of commercial confidentiality. It's public money, and if a company wants to enter into a contract with government, then they should be prepared for that contract to be fully open to scrutiny, to allow people to see that government is being contractually fair, and also that the conditions of the contract can be scrutinised by people who might wish to do so, either yourselves as the media or people with a special interest in the area of concern that the contract has. And I think it's, it happens in other jurisdictions. In America, public money for a contract is published as a matter of course. And there's no reason why it should be commercially confidential in our view. As I say, it's public money. It's our money that's being spent, and we have a right to know that it's being spent properly.
Interestingly, I asked... in the interests of openness and transparency, I asked a question of Orsted. How does Moor Vannin benefit the Isle of Man? How much are you paying on seabed rental? Mm-hmm. And they said, we'd love to tell you, but the department, I think it's the Department of Infrastructure in this case, has bound us to a commercially confidential contract, which seemed a bit bizarre, really.
It's totally bizarre. I mean, what's the benefit of that to anyone, and why is it secret? And especially if Orsted are quite happy to divulge it anyway. But it's just an example of its past attitudes to the way contracts work on the island. And they just hide behind this commercial confidentiality clause to to my mind, no apparent reason.
And presumably your man in Council of Ministers had some involvement in this discussion?
Well, in terms of our policy, Laurie is totally behind the proposal that we put forward at the AGM, and he will argue for it in the Council of Ministers, but he's one voice, and he doesn't have the right to make sure it comes into force.
Yeah, you don't have a veto as a single member, do you?
No.
Anyway, other things then well, certainly one particular thing that I thought, oh gosh, that's. I mean, it's not really bold, but it is going to cause a ripple of anxiety amongst the wealthiest in the island, and that is you're talking about the levy. I mean, was this the health and social care levy?
Following the last budget, when the 2p was raised on the 20% rate of tax that most people are paying, there was the Treasury Minister, Alex Allinson, said that it would be replaced within 12 months with a new levy. We supported the tax increase at the time because we felt that there was a need for more spending on health and social care amongst other areas of government. Education, I think, was part of the beneficiary of the extra money too. But we particularly felt that health and social care needed more money and still needs more money, despite the increase this year. But the way it was raised wasn't really fair, and tax thresholds weren't raised at the same time. So the burden disproportionately falls on the poorer sections of the population. Those earning the least money are paying a higher proportion in terms of that extra tax. And we've wanted to put a marker down at our AGM that when the new tax levy is properly discussed in Tynwald, that if it happens, and we're questioning whether there is a need for the levy at all, or whether it would be better just left as part of general taxation, and do we need an extra level of tax above the 20%, for instance, and should there be changes to the tax cap and national insurance cap to raise more money? But if there is a new tax levy, then it should be more fairly distributed in terms of the people contributing to it. And one way of doing that is to take account of the fact that there are quite a lot of wealthy people on the island who don't pay an awful lot of income tax for a variety of reasons. They have various tax structures that allow them to discount that. So whether there should be some form of wealth tax, whether it's based on property or trusts or whatever wealth people have on the island, it should be brought into the tax take in some way. So we're asking Treasury to review that and come back and report on it, rather than just saying, oh, well, the new tax levy will just mirror the way income tax is collected.
And of course, currently we do have just one form of taxation which, to a certain extent anyway, taxes your wealth, and that is the local authority rate.
And it's well out of date, as everyone knows.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But again, I'm surprised that the Liberal Vannin Party, and indeed very few politicians, appear to be interested in actually looking at the rate system. I think everyone on the island agrees that it's unfair.
Yeah.
Everyone agrees that it needs to change, but no one seems that keen on doing anything about it.
Well, I did when I stood at the last election in Aaron Michael, I raised the issue and said that I felt that the local authority system in general, but the way it's financed, should be reviewed and reform brought in. Chief Minister on the hustings at the time, Alf Cannon, now Chief Minister, said that he didn't see it as a priority. And I think that's the problem, that people are aware that it's an issue that's well out of date and needs reform, but for whatever reason no one seems to think it's a priority, so it doesn't happen.
And part of that reason, inevitably, is it's not an electorally popular thing to say to people.
Well, I think it is in some parts.
Tax.
Otherwise, people wouldn't keep complaining about it. I think it's another issue to do with party politics. Independents don't have any feeling of tackling issues that are difficult. It's only a political party that can look at government in the round and say, well, these are issues that have been dragging on for years. We can suggest a way of putting it right. But you need to have that party structure to develop a set of policies that people can gather around and vote for or against. It's a matter of putting issues to the public. But if no one's doing that in a coherent manner, then it just gets left on the shelf.
Because actually one of the refreshing things, I suppose, about the media release that followed your AGM was that the two issues that you have highlighted are effectively tax and spend. The two biggest issues facing the Isle of Man at the moment. Well, the big problem is a hole in government finances, and you've mentioned that maybe it should be just left to taxation earlier on rather than introduction of a levy, but many people will say businesses, when deciding are they going to relocate to the Isle of Man, look at headline tax rates, and what they will see is that they like the income tax rate where it was. They're not that keen on the fact that we've raised it, and the fact that we're now demonstrating a level of instability in our tax structure, according to the people who work in these areas, has led to some nervousness. VAT, of course, is something that's controlled outside of the Isle of Man. One of the few areas that is of taxation on the island that's remarkably low and hasn't really changed for a very long time, certainly low compared with surrounding countries, is the local taxation or the rating system. So it does seem surprising that so few people are interested in it. I
think, it is surprising, but it's also, we've got a history now of 50 to 70 years of being seen as a low tax jurisdiction. It's obviously raising some nervousness if we're moving away from that slightly. I would say that the rise in income tax was not a major shift. It was a bit of a surprise to a lot of people, I think, that it happened at all. But
and I think that was it wasn't so much the amount that it changed, it was the fact that government had decided that actually this was now a reasonable thing to do. We're short of money, therefore we'll increase taxes. I suspect that people had, over many years, got used to the fact that the tax rate, the headline income tax rate, didn't change, and that did lead to some level of nervousness. And not least because, of course, the thresholds didn't change.
And that was a big mistake, I think. And Alex Allinson said he would hope to put it right in the next budget. So we'll see if that happens or not. But you have to remember as well that, our nearest neighbouring jurisdiction, the tax rate there is significantly higher, and in their next budget may well be increased taxes rather than bringing taxes down. So we have to see ourselves in relationship to the UK in most circumstances. And going back to VAT, the recent rise in or the change to VAT rules for private education in the UK is having a ripple effect here with King Bills. Our government probably can't do much about that in terms of not following that change, but I think we do have an ability to think about how much money will be raised by the VAT on public school fees at King Bills, and is there any way of assisting King Bills by putting that money back into their pocket by supporting them with projects, for instance, in the future?
I'm guessing, though, that the hospitality sector that have been banging away for several months, if not years now, about VAT on their products, would be somewhat concerned to note that a private school effectively would be getting government support because of a change in VAT, when effectively many of them are really struggling to remain in business.
Yeah, well, we'll have to see how Alex Allenson responds. He might be very happy to pocket whatever extra revenue he's going to get in as a bit of a windfall to put towards other areas of the economy. But again, we do have some leeway in how VAT is applied on the island, and there is a little bit of exemption, or 5% rather than 20% for some areas of spend on the island, and perhaps we could look at the hospitality sector and tourism areas in general to see if more support can be given in terms of VAT reductions to assist people in that sector.
We're almost at the end of the programme now, and we've discussed the whole party political versus independent route here, but we're 2 years out now from the general election. I suppose the obvious question is, and we only have a few minutes left. Do you think that Liberal Vannin will be fielding candidates in every constituency? Is that your hope, at
ambition?
least?
Well, we'd certainly love to, and we would have loved to at the last general election, but we only managed to find 4. We're hoping that we can find more than 4 for the next one. There is the local authority elections next year, next April. So we're looking at those to help to generate more enthusiasm for party politics leading up to the general election the year after. So we'll see how we get on with fighting the local elections next year, and hopefully we can build on that. But the main thing that our priority at the moment is to keep the profile of the party in people's minds, and to develop policies that make sense to match the concerns that people have at the way the island is governed at the moment.
I suppose this might be a bit cruel, but I'm going to ask you to give me in a nutshell, this is what the Liberal Vannin Party actually is. So if someone was interested, they're listening to this programme and they're thinking, okay, well, maybe I am getting a little bit concerned that maybe things aren't happening the way I would have hoped in government. Maybe I'm paying more than I was initially anticipating, or whatever their issue might be, or perhaps I'm still struggling to find a house. Why would they go to the Liberal Vannin Party, and what is the thing that differentiates the Liberal Vannin Party from any of the others?
Well, I think there are 2 areas. One is that we want to give, as I've mentioned earlier in this discussion, we want government to be more open and transparent than it is at the moment, and to be more responsive to the concerns that people have. But if you want to differentiate us from, say, Manx Labour, we're in favour of a mixed economy. We're not in favour of everything being done by government. There's a consultation at the moment, for instance, on how waste is managed on the island, and there is a role for the private sector in that. There are people already involved, especially on the commercial waste side, in the private sector. There's a private company operating the energy from waste plant. So we think that waste management would be best done on an island-wide basis, and perhaps put out to tender. So that would differentiate us, I think, from Manx Labour for a start. We do feel that there are areas of public service on the island that need more money. Health and social care is definitely one. We need to protect financing for education. There are areas of government where more money is likely to be needed in future. So the only way of achieving that is to look at the tax take. But that doesn't mean that we should say, government shouldn't try to be more efficient in everything else it does, and even in health and social care and education. You can always find efficiency savings, and we shouldn't shy away from that.
That was Paul Wetherill from Liberal Vannin. So what do you think? Is the Liberal Vannin Party making a difference? Is it time for the Isle of Man government to introduce a tax on wealth? Do government contracts need to be more transparent? I'm Phil Gorn. Guramaeus and Geistachrum. Thanks for listening.